So I keep using this word amortization, and then you've heard me say fully amortized. So when I say fully amortized, that's what we're just looking at. When you make the same payment each month and you make the last payment, it's going to result in a zero balance. Zero balance means it is a fully amortized loan, means the life of the loan was enough to pay it off. But there is also something called a partially amortized loan. Partially amortized. Now, a partially amortized would have a payment schedule that would get it down to a certain point, but not pay it off all the way. And the logic behind it is these are typically associated with what we call a balloon payment. And so you would make your payments to reduce it down to a certain amount. And at the end of that partially amortized time period, you would make a balloon payment as an expanded, a big payment to pay off the rest. And so it would be like, I paid it down to $100,000 and then just made one lump payment of $100,000. Most of us don't do this because we have no anticipation of having $100,000 at the end of the term, which is why we do a fully amortized, right? We want it to be paid off through this amortization process. But partially amortized is not uncommon for commercial and or although there's something else that they also like to do where they don't amortize it at all. And we're going to talk about that. So partially amortized means that it will not result in a zero balance. It'll still have some money left over at the end of the term, and you just make a balloon payment to pay it off. Fully amortized means when you make your last payment, your balance is zero. Everybody good on that statement?
You're saying that, the commercial spaces can do this, usually do this. So which means that they are not paying their monthly payment standardly, or how does that happen?
Commercial, they are making monthly payments, but it's not going to result in paying off the full balance. So I'll tell you what's on it's about to come up on the slides, but let me explain this. A lot of times commercial developers will do what's called interest only loans, where they basically will not they'll make monthly payments because the bank's going to require them to get, but they're not going to be paying down the principal balance. So they borrowed $2 million. They're going to be paying just enough to cover the interest each month. And the idea behind this is it keeps their carrying costs much lower because they're only paying interest. And then they're going to make a balloon payment at the end. Typically, when they sell the land to developers and make $6 million, they'll just pay off a lump sum of $2 million. So they're making payments. It's just not enough to fully pay down the loan, or they're only paying interest only, which way they elected to go. Yep. So these partially amortized, I told you, the monthly payment is not sufficient to pay off the full balance. And so at the maturity date, you would have that balloon payment that you would have to make. Nothing too crazy there. Whatever is left over, you'd pay off at that point. And you could design it where it's $100,000. You could design it where it's $10,000. You could design $1 million. It just depends on, why you did it that way and what kind of money you're expecting, so on and so forth. Huzzah. When we're dealing with, let me just make sure I provide some clarity here. Now you're starting to see these words like fixed rate. Most people have been doing fixed rates more often than not. And so that means that the interest rate will not change over the life of the loan. And so if it's a fixed rate, fully amortized, right, payments for principal and interest, the life of the loan, so on and so forth. But when we're dealing with this, there are adjustable rate mortgages as well, which may make, a little bit of a comeback because of the ability to get a lower introductory rate, but they're not super common yet. So when we say fixed rate, that's all I mean. The interest rate is fixed. It's not changing. This is to build equity with first month payment. In other words, as soon as you make a payment and you pay down your principal sum, you start building equity. Also understand that whatever your down payment is also equity. Arguably at the day of closing, the equity you have per se in the house is your down payment. So fixed rate just means the rate will not change. Obviously, an adjustable rate, it can change. We'll talk about that one in just a second. So here's just a graph to show you what I was talking about, right? When we talk about that amortization, starts very interest heavy and very principal low, and then it shifts after a while. Exactly what it does. Here's the bad thing about this, though, in case you were wondering. If you're dealing with this and you've been in your house, if you're dealing with this and you've been in your house for like 10 years, and then you refinance starts this all over. And so if you're close to year 15, where you were really starting to gonna shift and putting some headway, but you refinance, hopefully you didn't refinance for another 30 years, because that clock starts over. And the way that the amortization starts over. So, you know, sometimes it's worth it to refinance for like a 10-year mortgage or something like that if you're at that point, because you've gained so much equity. But obviously, if you refinance at any point, the clock kind of resets, and the way that this happens kind of starts over. So that's what I keep telling you. Fully amortized, when you make your last payment, your balance is paid off. No más money that you owe anybody. I don't know why this is doing this again. Here's what I was just talking about with Sandeep. There is another repayment style called interest only. And I told you this is very common for developers. This is where they borrow money and they're just making enough of a payment to give the bank their interest each month. They have no intention of paying down the principal during the term of the loan. And the reason they do this is to keep their carrying costs low. As you can imagine, a lot of money being shelled out to develop, you know, a whole bunch of acreage. And so if they $1 million for the property, they're having to pay another $1 million for development. They want to keep their carrying costs low, and so they just do the interest only. And then what happens is at the maturity date, they make that balloon payment and just pay it off. So if the developer sells all their lots, makes $6 million, they're just going to recover them $1 million in development costs, the $2 million that they borrowed from the bank, and then they're going to profit the other $3 million or whatever it may be. So there is fully amortized, partially amortized, then there's interest only. Interest only and partially amortized both have balloon payments at the end. Fully amortized does not. It's just the exact same payment every single month until the last one, and then your balance is zero. So the adjustable rate mortgage that I was also called an ARM sometimes, ARM, adjustable rate mortgage, is exactly what it sounds like. It is where the interest rate can adjust up or down at regular predetermined interval periods. There is what we call a 5-year ARM that is very common, where it'll be fixed for 5 years, but then after 5 years, it'll go into an adjustable rate. The reason why people elect to do these is sometimes lower introductory rate because of the nature for it to increase. And so like if the average rates were sitting at 6.9 right now, they may say, well, we'll give you a 5.75 for the first 5 years, but then it's going to adjust and then it can go up. So sometimes it's worth it to do like a 5-year ARM if you're going to refinance within 5 years. But if you're going to, you know, be there forever, it's dangerous because your interest rates can go up. Obviously, because the interest rate changes, your monthly payment can also change. So when a fully amortized loan, that P&I wouldn't change. But in this one, it would, because your interest rate could change.
So does borrower need to do anything, or does the bank, or I mean the lender automatically renews or redoes this calculation on 5 years?
Yeah, they have to notify you, and they do the calculation, and then they would just tell you what you owed.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And this is what I was just telling you. Initial rate typically referred to as that teaser rate because they may give you a little bit lower than the market average, because it's the nature of the adjustable rate. And then, it has the potential to climb, although it can go down as well, right? It can climb and it can go down. The one problem with these, let's see what's on the next slide. Yeah, there it is. So I'll wait and say it whenever it shows up right there. Because not a terrible idea if only going to be there for a couple of years, or if you're planning on refinancing and you've got a lower interest rate and you've got that 5-year, arm or something like that. Interval periods, they're not as testable, because when I was talking about a 5-year arm, what that is actually, I told you it's fixed for 5 years and then it goes adjustable after. What this is talking about is intervals of increase. So there are different types that say they can change every year. There are some that change every 2 years. Nothing that crazy, worry about there. I can't really see a question that's going to screw with you too much in that regard. Understand too that the rate is not just because the banks want to charge you more. It is based on the market index of where they're lending at, and so there's some iteration there. There's something it has to correlate to. They can't just say, well, we just want to charge you more this month, right? It has to be based off that published index and have a correlation to that, the adjustable rate.
Can lenders decide just with a regular loan, can lenders decide what they want to charge, or is it on what the going rate is? I guess, if that makes sense.
It does have a correlation with the going rate, but yes, they absolutely can charge what they want to charge. So if you had an immaculate credit score and went to 3 different lenders, one may tell you that they can do it for like right now the average is like 6.7. One may say they could do it for 6.7, one may tell you 7.2, one may tell you 6.5. And there's different reasons and ways that do that depending on programs and the way that they've borrowed money. So there is a correlation to it, but just because the Fed is at a certain number doesn't mean that they all have to charge you the same interest rate. Does that make sense? Yeah. So interest rate caps does provide protection for borrowers. It can limit how much rate can go up or down in a given period of time, and it would limit the payment increase, which is a good thing. The problem, however, comes when if you have a payment cap, your payment may not exceed a certain number, but if your interest has gone up to a certain level, that means you may be in what's called negative amortization, where the payment cap that you're paying is not enough to pay the principal and the interest. And so you may actually be losing equity, or negative amortization would mean that you owe them interest that they didn't get paid. So it's very dangerous and one of the biggest downfalls of what could arise with a adjustable rate mortgage. Because if it got to the point where it's 8% and your cap on your payment was $1,500 a month and the interest itself was $1,500, you were never actually paying down your loan. You're just paying interest only. Or worst case scenario, right? It was interest $1,500, your payment cap was $1,400. You'd be accruing more interest that would get tacked on. That's negative amortization. That's a bad thing, to say the least.
Quick question.
Yeah.
In case if that happens, do you add more years to your mortgage that you're not paying towards it?
It could happen because the banks don't forgive anything, shape or form under normal circumstances. So you may do what's called a loan modification, or it may just, be tacked on at the end. It would be up to the bank on how they treat that. Yeah.
Okay.
So on Lydia's question, so this happens in Indian banks. I mean, this happened to me recently. Like they just bumped up the interest rate. Where initially I had to pay for 15 years, but now it's went up to 17 years something.
Oh, wow. On a home loan?
Yeah, it's a home loan.
Home loan, yeah. Well, I mean, 17 is still better than 30, but that kind of sucks that they can just add on dates like that, you know?
Exactly. 2 years more, Seth.
Yeah, 2 years, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's cold-blooded. Yeah, so there, I mean, there's risks with, you know, a bunch of different loan programs out there. And so this is kind of the inherent risk with these adjustable rate mortgage concepts, things that could arise.
I'm confused, I'm sorry, with negative amortization. If the interest is always paid first, how are you short interest and not short principal?
So that's what I'm saying, because of payment caps. Let me put this back up. If you had a payment cap, it could limit how high the payment could ever become. In other words, if you had a payment cap that says you will never pay more than $1,500 a month towards your principal and interest, but you don't interest rate cap, and so your interest goes up to 8%, and 8% of your loan ends up being $1,700 a month, that means the payment is not enough to even pay all the interest. That's negative amortization.
Okay, phew, okay, got it, thank you.
Yep. Because you're making that one payment of 1,500 and your interest is 1,700. And so you're not even covering the interest, let alone touching the principal. So we've talked about, Lawrence, you got a question? Oh, no, you're good. You've heard me say senior and junior whenever I was talking about home equity lines of credits. When we're dealing with mortgages, or in other words, borrowing money, and we don't have mortgages, but we have deeds of trust. So the liens associated with this, they are put on as they're recorded, right? So when you buy your house, you have a lien on it immediately. And anytime that you do anything else, there would be additional liens on your house. And they're always paid out as a first come, first serve. North Carolina is called a pure state, first recorded, first paid out. And so if you've got a, you know, your loan lien on your house, that would be what we call a senior mortgage. It's the first mortgage lien that's recorded. And then any other ones would be called secondary or junior mortgages. And so it would be subject to the first lien. And obviously, if there's ever a foreclosure, they'd be paid out in that order. But sometimes there are times that you refinance or get a home equity line of credit, or you do something with your bank, and they will file what's called a subordination agreement that says, even though this recorded first, we have agreed that this one will be the senior and it will sit in a primary position. It's called a subordination agreement. You put this one after that one, that it happens. But otherwise, it's first come, first serve. So the first one is the senior, and any secondary ones are considered junior mortgage liens. As you can imagine, the further along you are on the line, the more risky it is. Oops.
Sorry, my mic was off. Is there ever a time where the senior loan can like deny you being able to do that with another loan?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes yeah, let's just leave it at that. Yes, for sure. I was going to say, when you're dealing with this, they have a lot of things in place with loans and the way you can do things. So for example, even if you wanted to like give partial ownership to somebody, you can't do that because of the way that we, you know, have an interest in it. And so that's also the reason why banks like to escrow your money, because remember what I told you, real property tax liens are considered a priority lien. They always sit in first place, no matter when they were recorded. So that's why banks don't like to risk you not paying your taxes, because that's like the only thing that and special assessments could eat away at them being first in line for any money. And so they very much have rules. So we've already done some calculations, so this shouldn't really be too much of a surprise when we look at some of these things. But you know, the math part is always fun. This slide 500 times. Now, let me move forward here, okay? I just want to talk to you for a second because this chart can be very intimidating. All right. So I just don't want the chart yet. Just look at me. Let me talk to you. I told you because of the way the amortization works. If I told you that you had a 30-year loan at 3.5%, it would be impossible for any of you to calculate everything that goes in with that just as sitting, right? To tell me how much you'd have to pay a month to pay it off. It would be impossible. And so what this is a really smart chart that tells you how much you would have to pay each month to amortize based on some loan terms. Now, this chart is based off of $1,000. So let me explain. If I said, you see what these lines intersect, if I said that you borrowed $1,000 and promised to pay it back over a term of 15 years at an interest rate of 4.5%, you would have to pay $7.65 a month to amortize that $1,000 over the life of the loan. That's what this is saying. So just like I've been showing you what your principal and interest payment had to be, this is your principal and interest payment. You would have to make a principal and interest payment of $7.65 each month to fully pay off $1,000 if you were paying it off over the next 15 years at 4.5%. That's all this is saying. And so let me explain something, and I'll go back in just a second. Folks, when you borrow money to buy a house, are you only paying back $1,000?
No,
No.
no, complete. I mean, it can be n times, like, I mean, how much ever we borrow.
Yeah, you can borrow a lot. And so if you think about it, if you were borrowing $200,000, promise to pay it back over 15 years at 4.5%, you would have to pay $7.65 to amortize $1,000. Well, you're not trying to amortize $1,000. You're trying to amortize how much?
200,000.
200,000. So all you have to do is take your loan amount and figure out how many times 1,000 goes into it. In other words, divided by 1,000. So you would have to pay $7.65, 200 each month. Or in other words, 200 times $7.65.
1530.
So to fully amortize $200,000 over these loan terms, your principal and interest payment would be $1,530. And I'm sorry, Sandeep, what did you say? Did
I
you
was
say the
saying
number?
1530. I was
Okay,
saying.
that's what I thought you said, the number. 1530. You see how this works? This chart's intimidating, but it's just a really smart, tells you how much you would have to pay based on loan terms to fully amortize $1,000. And you just have to figure out how many times 1,000 goes into how much you're borrowing, and that will give you your principal and interest payment. That is why this is called an amortization schedule or a loan factor chart. This is a very smart chart. Now, let me explain something else to you. You do not need to memorize this chart in any way, shape, or form. If we give you a test, we will either give you the loan factor in the question, or we will give you a picture of this chart. Nobody has to memorize this. So the way that this works is all you have to do is find where the two numbers correlate. In other words, if you were borrowing 30-year term at, let's do 5%. Oop, I was drunk. Find where they correlate. That would be your loan factor, $5.37. So in other words, if you borrowed $1,000 and promised to pay back over 30 years at 5% interest, you would have to pay $5.37 each month to fully amortize $1,000. If you were borrowing $300,000 and I said, what is the principal and interest payment? All you do, once again, figure out how many times 1,000 goes into the amount you borrowed. In this case, $300,000. divided by 1,000 goes into it 300 times. And so think about it. If you had to pay $5.37 each month to amortize $1,000, you need to pay that 300 times each month in order to fully amortize $300,000. In other words, 300 times 537. There's a reason I'm saying it that way, right? You would have to pay it this many times because you're multiplying it together. So the principal and interest payment based on loan terms would be 1,611. Now, please understand that this is not the pity payment. Remember, T and I don't go into amortization, just P and I, principal and interest. We'll go back a slide. That's all this loan factor. Man, I just explained it. You don't need to see that slide. That's all this chart's saying. Based on any given loan terms, how much would you have to pay each month to fully amortize $1,000? And you just have to figure out how many times that 1,000 goes into what you're actually borrowing. And you can figure out your principal and interest payment using this really smart chart. So if we look at this one, it says, what would the monthly principal and interest payment be for a $1,000 loan issued for 20 years at 5% annual interest rate? Now, folks, I know it's hard because you're just looking at slides, but 20 years, 5%. $6.60. You agree? Because we just asked about $1,000, and so that's what this chart's built off of. So if we were to figure out how much I had to pay each month for 1,000, that's it. $6.60 each month to fully amortize $1,000 over the life of the loan. So if we're dealing with this, if we took a look, well, let me just, this is just to help you understand it. How many times would that go into 1,000? Well, 1, because it's based off 1,000. How many times would that go into 2,000? Twice. And so if we looked at the loan factor, 20-year, 5% interest, like we just did, let me write it down. It was 660. So we would have to pay $6.60 for 1,000. Well, we would have to pay double that for 2,000, because let me just show you 2,000 divided by 1,000, 2, and then you multiply by your loan factor of 660. So for a loan of $2,000, you'd have to pay $13.20 a month. For a loan of $3,000, or I'm sorry, 5,000. Lord, my brain. So 5,000 divided by 5, so 5 times your loan factor of 660. It'd be 33 a month. $12,000, and I'm just showing you the math. I mean, obviously, y'all know it's just 12, but 12,000 divided by 1,000, 12 times. So 12 times your loan factor, $79.20 a month. And so it's really no different if you're getting into these big numbers. It's just, if you borrowed $187,000, how many times does 1,000 go into it? Times your loan factor. $1,234.20. Everybody see what's happening there? That's all this charge.
So this chart is called amortization chart, or what exactly?
It's called an amortization schedule chart or a loan factor chart. You can call it either.
Okay.
So if we were looking at an actual question, okay, was using the amortization chart to the right, answer the following. Sam is purchasing a home for $450,000. in obtaining an 80% loan to value loan in order to accomplish the purchase. He has been offered a 30-year note issued at 6.25% interest. What will his monthly principal and interest payment be? Now, this is a multi-step math problem, but because this chart's so hard to follow, I'm going to help you with the loan factor. Then I want you to figure out the answer. It is 30 years. And one other thing, you got to understand how decimals and fractions correlate. 0.25 is the same as saying and a quarter. So 6.25%. So the loan factor is 616. So do the math for me. What is the monthly principal and interest payment based on that number?
It's 2217.6.
So let's work this out together. When you're dealing with a problem like this, I'm gonna my calculator over. It's $6.16. Purchasing the home for $450. Well, that's the purchase price. This is based off of loan amount. So you need to start with finding the loan amount, $450,000 times your 80% loan to value ratio. Means you were getting a loan of $360,000. And here's the thing, the 30-year and 6.25% are used only to find that factor. You do not need to do anything else with that interest number because it's under consideration with that number. So 360,000 divided by 1,000 times your factor of 6.16. 2217.60. Because remember that chart is based off of 1,000. So the question you're always answering is how many times does the 1,000 go into our principal balance? Just find how many times it goes into it and then multiply by the loan factor. And that gives you your principal and interest. Now, when you're dealing with this, just be very careful with the verbiage of the question, because sometimes, you know, they're asking for something different. And so don't always just assume that that's what they're looking for, because sometimes they'll give you that loan factor. And what we're going to look for is like interest paid over the life of the loan. We're going to do that in just a second. So that's one we just did. So I've already explained the pity payment to you. Okay, only the principal and interest part goes towards your amortization, and then taxes and insurance are your escrows. And so your bank is holding money on behalf of you to pay your tax bill, insurances. And I say insurances because it can cover your homeowner's insurance and any PMI or mortgage insurance that you may have, depending on your loan type. So that is the breakdown of the pity payment: principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Becky, you said that was the easiest math approach you've ever seen. Everybody else making it way more complicated than it needs to be? Yes. Shame on them. Shame on them. They don't need to make math complicated. So you've always got to be careful from the test point of view. Are we doing something with amortization, which means we're only looking at principal and interest, or there's only principal and interest, or are we looking at the whole pity payment? So sometimes we will ask you to find the whole pity payment. And so yet again, multifaceted math problems, because we may give you that loan factor and all that information to help you find the principal and interest payment. But then we'll give you other information to find the taxes and insurance, and then you combine them all together. And so I just want you to understand that you have yearly taxes of whatever they are. Okay, so taxes, I'll just put yearly taxes, YT, of $2,200. And your homeowner's insurance costs $1,000 a year. Homeowner's insurance. The way that these escrows work, the way that your pity payment is structured, whether you realize this or not, is they just want you to give them 1 month's worth of the bill every single month. And so if we were asking for what portion of the pity payment is the T, right? The taxes, all you would do is take your yearly tax bill of 2,200 and divide it by 12. That's how much is going towards the T. If you were looking for the I, it is just your annual insurance, 1,000 divided by 12, 83.33. That is how much you pay each month. You've got your principal and interest, and then taxes, it's just 1/12 of the annual bill. Insurance is just 1 of the annual bill. That's it. It is not any more complicated than that. So let me show you this as kind of like a math problem. Carson is obtaining a $280,000 mortgage note at 5.25% annual interest over 15, for 15 years. The home has annual property taxes due of $29 and annual homeowners insurance bill of $960. Based on this information, what will be the monthly pity payment? Now, this is where we would have to give you the chart. So all you're doing, folks, is finding the principal and interest portion like we just did, which is, the loan amount and the amortization factor, and then just find 1/12 of the taxes, add it in, find 1/12 of the insurance and add it in. See what you can come up with for this. Find me the whole pity payment, then we'll work it out together. Try to be distracting, but there is legit a pot of dolphins swimming out there right now. And a bunch of college kids, but mostly dolphins. So let's work it out real quick. If we're doing the 0.25, even though it says it right there, I'm just going to show you on the chart. You've got 15 years at 5.25 to give us 8.04 as your loan factor. And so when we're doing this, understand that this one just automatically says the loan amount. So we're not making you do the purchase price LTV thing, but $280,000 loan amount divided by 1,000 times our loan factor of 8.04 gives us our principal and interest payment, just the P&I, of 2251.20. And then all you have to do is take your yearly tax bill, 29,600 divided by 12. So add in taxes of 246.67, and then same thing for insurance, $960 divided by 12. Oops. $80. So there's your I for $80. And just add them all up. 2251. I wish I get 20 plus 246.67 plus 80. 2577.87. That is it. It's all you have to do to find the pay. This is just doing the steps here. So there is the visual. How we feeling? Not too bad. Remember, the rule is, I don't know you're struggling if you don't talk to me, so. So do another one for me. I'll help you find the rate just because, you know, I know this charts can kind of be after this one. I'll feel good that you're feeling good. 4.25% interest for 30 years. So 30 years. 4.25. So your loan factor is 4.92. Find the pity payment for me one more again. Let's stand over here and look at dolphins while y'all do that. Okay, I'm back.
I don't even know what happened, but I feel lost.
Feel lost on the math?
No, on this one, like I don't know, like why I'm blinking, but yeah, I'm not getting what everyone else is getting.
Well, we will see when I work it out. I'll give you another. I'm gonna see what y'all get, and then I'll work it out for you. So let's work it out and see where we're any discrepancies may lie. Okay, let's get the calculator out here. Move it down. So Cindy is obtaining a $425,000 mortgage note. That is the loan amount. Okay, and so we've got the loan factor. So we've got to find our principal and interest. $425,000 loan amount divided by 1,000. Right, that's 1,000 goes into 425,000 is 425 times our loan factor of 4.92, which gives us the principal and interest only. This is just the P&I of 2091. Then we need to find T for taxes. So our annual property tax bill is 5642. So 5642 divided by 12 should be $470.17. And the last one is the I, the insurance. And so annual homeowners insurance bill of 1320 divided by 12, 110. Add them all up. 110 plus 470 plus 2091. 26, 71, 17, or 16, depending on how you round it. How are we feeling? I'll leave that up on the screen for a second. Folks, y'all go ahead and take your break. 2 o'clock, 2:10, then you're in the home stretch day. We'll come back and we'll keep on keeping on. All right, folks, 2:10. Work your way back, get your cameras back on, and we're in the home stretch for the day. Start rocking and rolling. So as we move forward, I just want to check again, how is everybody feeling about this matter currently talking about with this amortization factor and the charts and pity payments and the difference between, you know, just the amortization and the pity as a whole. How everybody doing okay with the concept?
Doing good.
Good.
Surprisingly, the math is the part I get the best out of all of this.
That's a good thing, right?
I think it's because it deals with money.
Right. People can associate with money, right? And so like, all right, yeah, money, yeah. Just like commission math. Every single one of you gonna figure out how to do commission math. I know that. So. Good deal.
I had to go find a calculator. I'm at my lady friend's parents' house and left my calculator. So doing on the computer is not the ideal way to do this.
I completely agree with you, right? Because like I have to use this one so y'all can see it. And I'm like, I hate this calculator because I have to like sit, click, 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 and it's so easy to mess up on. Yeah. Yep. I'm with you. Fortunately, if I do it on my phones, y'all can't see it. So I have to do it on the screen so y'all can see what I'm doing, work out the math. I am
In the
with,
final exam, do they allow the calculator?
say what?
In the final exam, I mean, in the exam, like
Yeah.
the licensing. Okay.
Yeah, you can use a stupid calculator, right? A basic four function calculator. And then on our exam, we actually have it built into the program. So there's a digital calculator on the computer that you can use, but you can also bring a stupid calculator. Obviously, you can't use a graphing calculator, and you can't use a your phone as a calculator, but yeah, you can use a calculator. Tara said it'll definitely take some time going over and watching the videos again. Yeah, and that's okay, right? I mean, the thing is, this subject, just like a lot of other things, gets better with time. And the good news is we're ahead of schedule, so we will have time to circle back around and review this some more and talk about it some more. So we're in good shape. Like nobody panic if you're not quite like 1,000% grasping this yet, because this is, even though it is math and it's money and those are familiar, it is such an abstract concept nonetheless with like the pity payment, because most of us are just like, I don't know, I pay this much a month and like that's it. You don't really think about like where it actually goes and how it's allocated and you know the difference between your debt service and you know everything else. So this is it's unique. But
So
yeah.
I'm probably asking a question that's already been explained to us, and it's a simple question. So the math sheets I worked on in between, like you requested us to, I have not turned them in. Do we have a time limit? They're completed.
No,
Okay,
it doesn't matter like when you do it as long as it's done before the final exam.
perfect. Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
mine
so,
are
like, I'm not-
completed.
yeah.
My service here at my house is very similar to yours in Georgia. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to work it out to where I'm away from the house to get those to you guys.
Okay. Yeah, like I was gonna say, I completely sympathize because when I was trying to upload stuff, I'm like, man, like the download speeds are fine, but I think uploads like 1 point, and you know, I'm like, ew, you know, like nothing was uploading. It was bad. Yeah, I completely get it. So you are good. So we just broke down all that. Now here's the thing, okay? Let me talk about this concept because this is another mathematical concept. It's called interest paid over the life of a loan. And listen to me, okay? Listen to me. This is the easiest math that you will constantly try to get wrong. I promise you. This is the easiest math that you will constantly try to get wrong. And let me explain why. If you were to go to a question like this, how much is the total interest paid over the life of a 20-year mortgage loan, 225,000 issued at 4.5% interest with monthly principal and interest payments, yada, yada, yada. Because it's in the name of the question, everybody always wants to go to that interest rate. Don't you touch it. Because if we've got your principal and interest payment, it's already in there. Folks, if you are doing a 20-year mortgage, how many payments are you making?
240.
240. But I understand that because you make 12 a month, I'm sorry, 12 a year times 20 years, 240 payments. And if you're making 240 payments, they're all the same principal and interest payment. You know what you're paying towards principal and interest. Now, here's the deal. If you multiply your principal and interest by your number of payments, 1,424, 25, this number right here, listen to the, is total paid over the life of the loan. But folks, that's not just interest. Part of that is your what?
Principal as well.
Your principal. So all you have to do is take your P&I times your number of payments and then subtract out the principal balance, what you borrowed. That's your interest paid over the life of the loan. It is the easiest math that you will try to, because even after today, I promise you it happens every class. Even after today, if I bring up another math question, I show you this and I ask you to do it, everybody, not everybody, but so many people just start creating their own formula. They have no idea what they're doing, but they're like, 20, so 125,000 times 4.5 times 20 times this, and it doesn't work that way. It never fails. Like everybody tries to do like they have no idea what they're doing, but they just go for that interest rate. Like they need that, you don't. The only time you would need the interest rate in a question like this is where we didn't give you the principal and interest payment. You would use the interest rate to find the amortization factor, right? Because of the terms. And then you would calculate the principal and interest payment yourself and figure out the interest paid over the life of the loan. Does that make sense for everybody? So I skipped slides because it was just easier for me to explain it to you because of the way that it works. But when we're dealing with this, if you've got a 30-year mortgage, 12 months each year, that's a 360 payments over the life of the loan. If you've got 20 years, it's 240, so on and so forth. So just always read the question carefully to see how many payments you're making. And if you've got your principal and interest payment, interest is already included. So P&I times your number of payments gives you your total and interest paid over the life of the loan. In order to find the interest, just subtract out your principal balance, what you borrowed. That's it. There are a couple math concepts that if you just remember these couple, they're so easy, like the what would we have to sell for in order for the seller to net a certain amount of math. Like it's always the same. If you remember the way that I told you, right? Add up every number that has nothing to do with commission and then divide by what's left over after we take our commission, and that'll get you the answer every time. Same thing with this. If you've got your principal and interest payment already, just multiply it by the number of payments, subtract out your principal, and you'll find interest over the life of the loan every time. Let's see. Wish there was more examples because I just did that one, but you get it. We've got more examples I can pull up later. So when I keep talking about interest, we are dealing with simple interest, folks. Simple interest means we are just charging you interest based off what the current principal balance is, which is why amortization works the way it does, because your principal balance is ever changing, which means your interest that you pay each year, each month, each day is ever changing. Even though we look at it, when we say your interest rate, that is an annual interest rate. So principal balance times the annual interest rate gives us annual interest. And just like anything else, when you take the linear equation and plug it in across with the answer up on top, it's the whole times the rate equals the part. And this gives you the visual representation of how to work things backwards. So if we said that you had, annual interest of, I'm just giving you an example of $8,900 and your rate was 4.25, to do is divide, right? When you're going across, if we didn't have the principal loan amount and it says, what's your loan amount? You're just working it backwards. 8,900 divided by 0.0425 would give us their loan amount, 209,000. That is all the T-bars are. When you set them up, the whole times the rate gives you the piece up at the top. And it is a visual representation of when to divide. Because if you're going down the T, you're dividing. If you're going across the T, you're multiplying. So same thing too, if you're a linear equation person, you'd be the same as saying loan amount times 4.25% equals 8,900. And remember, if you divide by 4.25% on this side, it eliminates it. Divide by 4.25% on this side. Now the loan amount equals 8,900 divided by 4.25%. That's all the T-bar is just the visual representation of algebraic linear equations, because it's the same thing. 8,900 divided by 4.25%. Bam, same thing. So if we're talking basic interest, simple interest, $125,000 loan is issued at 8.75 annual interest. How much is the annual interest charge? That's all you're doing. If we have a question that's annual interest, that's the answer. Nothing crazy. Loan amount times your interest rate equals your annual interest. And you could see a question like that. Sometimes that's just piece of a question, but sometimes that's the whole question. This is just taking it a step further. If we interest, as I already showed you in the amortization math, you just divided by 12. So what would be the interest on your first month's payment? You just find your annual interest divided by 12. That's that interest for that month and that month only. Because we would have to do it every single month because your principal balance goes down every single month. So be very careful on test questions. If they want your monthly interest, that is a very different answer than your annual interest. So that's what this one's doing, just like I showed you that principal and interest math. If you had a loan, 218,000 at 6.25%, how much is the monthly interest charge? So you just take your loan amount times your interest rate to get your annual interest divided by 12, which gives us our monthly interest. And so if your your principal and interest payment was, I don't know, 1,400 a month. Remember, this always gets paid first. And whatever is left over goes towards your principal. And then you'd wash, rinse, repeat. That is amortization math. So, and I'll finish this up just because I have it up here and I don't want you to get confused. So if the principal and interest payment, I just added extra stuff in here. If it was $1,400 a month minus 1,130.42, that means that $264.58 would go towards your principal balance. And so after one payment, it would be new balance of 218,000 minus 264.58. So after your first payment, your new principal balance would be 217,735.42. And so if they asked you to do it for the second month, you'd same motion. Oops. But otherwise, simple interest is, just interest. So calculate this for me. What is your monthly interest for this one right here? 212,500 times your interest rate of set gives us annual interest of 12,750 divided by 12. Oh no. 1062.50. Huzzah. How about this one? So yet again, same thing. Loan amount 178,385 times your interest rate of 4.75% gives you annual interest of 8,473.28 divided by 12, monthly interest of $706.11. Simple interest. Yay. Ooh. Now, with something like this, there's more information and it's a multi-step problem. So try to work this out for me. Home is being purchased for 178,500. Buyer is obtaining a 90% loan to value ratio mortgage loan at 4.5%. So what is the monthly interest? Ooh. Give you just another 30 seconds or so to try to work this out. We'll go over it. So multi-step here. First, you got to find the loan amount. So we've got the purchase price. So purchase price times your loan to value ratio. So 178,500 times 0.9 or 90% gives us our loan amount of 160,650. And then we've got to find your annual interest rate. So that is your loan amount times your interest rate times 4.5%. So annual interest is 7,229.25. And then you just divide that by 12. 602.44. Now, folks, it's on here, but the idea is that you know how to do the math, right? So hopefully you're all feeling very comfortable with breaking down the multi-step piece because of the difference between purchase price and loan amount, right? You can't be calculating interest off of purchase price because that's not what you get charged on. They can only charge loan fees, interest, all these things off of loan amount. So you always got to make sure you find the right number before you even start the math. Um, this is just showing the breakdown. So this is kind of what we've already done, but this is just asking individual pieces. Shelley has taken a $100,000 mortgage loan at 5% annual interest. Her monthly pity payment includes escrows for her real property taxes and insurance on the home. Annual property tax bill is $1,200 and her annual hazard insurance is $600. What is the breakdown of the $687 monthly mortgage payment? So if that's her total pity payment, we're asking how much of that pity payment is insurance. And so it's the same thing. Annual insurance is 600 divided by 12 gives us 50. And then taxes 1,200 divided by 12 gives us 100. And so everything else is principal and interest. That's all this is. So reverse engineered pity question. Just figuring out how you allocate each piece. Ooh, need more coffee. Sherry, I don't have I have a coffee pot in the room, but like I just never use like coffee pots in the room, you know. I just feel weird about it. So like there's a coffee pot like in arm's reach. I could totally just go like if I had water, but I just didn't do it. It's a struggle. I'm like a half a pot kind of guy, you know. Need a lot of coffee. Still need a robot butler. Absolutely true. Very much so. Very much so. So here's where the other part of this question could come into play. So if we were dealing with calculating the interest, obviously when you subtract out the part that going towards taxes and insurance, everything that's left is the principal and interest payment. And so if you calculate your loan amount times your interest rate, that gives you $5,000 for annual interest divided by 12 would give us monthly interest. And so then you can figure out how much of this is also allocated towards principal using that methodology. So of the $687 pity payment, the whole payment, 50 went towards insurance, 100 is taxes, 416.67 is the interest based off of finding the annual interest dividing by 12 for the first month's payment. And then everything that doesn't go towards interest goes towards principal. So your principal after all was said and done would be 120.33, which means that your new balance is 100,000 minus $120.33. So that's the next piece of this, right? So your remaining balance after you pay that would be 99,879.67. And so with a question like that, sometimes they make you wash, rinse, and repeat. And so you could see a question that says, what is your remaining if you make your third payment? And so you would have to do this 3 times in a row to figure out what your remaining balance was after you calculated this 3 times. Because remember, your interest rate changes, not your rate, but your interest amount changes every time, which means the principal amount changes every time. So after 3 times, it would look a little bit different. So you would just repeat the process. Okay. Your payment would still be the same. So your principal and interest would be the same, but the way that it's allocated is different every single time. That's why we're using simple interest, right? Every single month, you have to calculate the interest separately because the principal balance has changed every single month. So same allocation. So now let's just figure out what the next is. And we do that by doing 99,879.67 times our interest rate again. Let me show you. So this is after 1 payment. So we're looking at payment number 2, 879.67 times our 5% interest. This is annual interest divided by 12. Now the new amount towards interest would be $416.17. And so everything that's left would go towards your principal. 1617 that we just did. And so that would leave $120.83 this time for principal after your second payment. And so then it would be 99,879.67 minus that balance, or that $120.83 to get a new balance. And this is called amortization math or pity payment math, whatever you call it. This is some of the questions you could see for this kind of stuff. Everybody with me? Is it making sense? It's not fun, but it makes sense. Hopefully. So here's where we subtracted it. Now after 2 payments, this is what our balance is. So here's, I think, the last math concept that we'll introduce for the financing chapter today, at least. And so I've already mentioned these terms, accrued interest and interim interest. And so when we're dealing with interest, I told you the banks get paid in arrears. So when you pay February 1st payment, you're paying for January's interest. March 1st payment is paying for February's interest. The 2 times that the bank is not going to get their interest as contemplated is at closing, where the buyer is buying a new house because their amortization schedule doesn't cover the interim in between there. And then the other time is when the seller sells their house before they make a payment. And so, excuse me, that would be accrued interest for the seller or interim interest for the buyer. I would wager that you're way more likely to see interim interest discussed. Accrued interest, I don't think is testable, but the mathematical concept works the same. But you have to understand that unlike when we're calculating real property taxes for the year, this has nothing to do with either other party, right? The buyer is paying their interest, the seller's paying their interest, but they both have to pay on the day of closing. They both do. If we're dealing with prorating taxes, rents, and HOA dues, we said the seller owns the day of closing. In other words, they're responsible for the day of closing, good, bad, or otherwise. But when it's dealing with the interim interest, they both have to pay the day of closing to their respective lenders, different lenders. It's not double dipping, right? They've all got their own lenders. They've all got their own interest. So you just stay within the month. Don't you ever go outside of a month for interim interest or accrued interest. So it is just within the month, the 30-day month, mind you, the 30-day month. Every month has 30 days. So the way that you look at it is the seller is responsible for paying the first of the month through and including the day of closing. And then the buyer is responsible for the day of closing through the end of the month, which in this class is always 30 days. And the thing is, the banks say, owe us interest for every day we let you borrow the money. And so for the seller, they've had that money, so it makes sense. But the buyer, the banks say, well, I gave you money today, start paying me interest today. So you do have to include the day of closing. Now, this is where I'm going to kind of skip some of the slides because I think that there's just, once again, kind of a lot going on with this. This is fine in general. Before I go there, let me just explain something to you. When we're dealing with interim interest and accrued interest, we are charging them daily amounts of interest. So folks, how do you think we figure out how much they have to get charged each day?
Divide
Divide
them
the
by
interest by
30,
30.
By what?
30 days.
Yeah, you could, but to even make it easier than that, we could do the annual interest divided by 360 days. Annual interest divided by 360 days because we've got the full year. And so what we're doing is we figure out how much they have to pay each day, and then we have to figure out how many days they have to pay for. And the seller is easy because since it always runs from the first of the month up to including the day of closing, the seller always owes the days of closing. In other words, if you're closing on the 20th, they owe 20 days. If you're closing on the 10th, they owe 10 days. It will never deviate for the seller because it is always the first of the month through and including the day of closing. Does that make sense? So there's no guessing game on how many days the seller's responsible for their accrued interest. Whatever day is closing, that's how many days they're responsible for. But the buyer is tricky, and that's why I wanted to come off this slide. Let me explain this. Every single month has 30 days in this class. And so if you were on February 10th, actually, let me make it 20th because it's going to be easier to explain this. February 20th. The way to calculate the days that a buyer is responsible for interim interest is how many days are in the month. So answer that for me. How many days are in the month?
30.
30. Always 30. So 30 minus the day of closing plus 1. And the reason you have to do that plus 1 is because if you just do 30 minus the day of closing, that's going to be counting the days after the day of closing. You have to add that 1 back in for the day of closing. And if you don't believe me, get out damn fingers and start counting on the day of closing. 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 11 days. So this is the time that you do this weird 30 days minus the day of closing plus 1. And it's very important that you do not get this confused with tax prorations or anything else. This is for interim interest only, which is loan stuff, which only affects the buyer. And so that's why we're charging the buyer on the day of closing. If we were doing tax prorations, the seller would pay the day of closing and the buyer would be responsible for everything after the day of closing. We're dealing with rents. The seller would pay or get the extra rent money, and the buyer would be the landlord for the day of closing. HOA dues, seller would pay the day of closing, buyer would be responsible for everything after the day of closing. Does that make sense? So let me show you one of these, because this is one of the least fun subjects for most people, but it's really not that hard once you grasp it. It's just such an abstract concept. So this is giving you the example that I just did. For the seller, it's always whatever the day of closing is. That's how many days are. For the buyer, it is 30 minus the day of closing plus 1. 30 minus the day of closing plus 1. So if you were looking at this, November 3rd, how many days would the buyer be, or I'm sorry, the seller, how many days would the seller be responsible for?
3.
3. Day of closing, that's it. How about the buyer? How many days is the buyer
28.
responsible for?
28.
30 closing plus 1. 28. Everybody good on figuring out the days? And if you don't like the 30 minus the day of closing plus 1 thing, like I said, use your fingers. Just start counting on the day of closing. Now, when it's like this, it's going to be a lot more counting. which is why this trick is helpful. But you know, you could third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way to the 30th, and you would get 28 days. So let's put this all together to get interim interest or accrued interest. I guess this is the accrued interest for the seller. I told you this is the one you're going to need less because I think the interim interest is definitely more testable, but we'll do one. Property is scheduled to close on July 12th of 2022, and the sellers have an outstanding loan balance of $352,050 as of their July 1st payment. Their loan is issued at 5% interest rate. Based on this information, how much accrued interest will the sellers owe at closing? So here's the deal. It's closing on July 12th. And so they're responsible for how many days?
12.
12. And so we've got our loan balance of 352,000. And so you're going to find your annual interest on that 5% interest rate. So 352,050. Oops. Times your annual interest rate of 5% gives us annual interest of 17,602. And I'll put that in here. Annual interest, 17,602.50. But what we need is the interest. So this is where we just divide by the days in the year, 360. So what this is saying is how much interest you would owe per day if we were charging you that way. And so it is daily interest of $48.90. And so days that they're responsible for times $48. Their accrued interest would be $586.80. And this is why your balance is not your loan payoff. So what would happen is you would have to pay your loan payoff off at closing, plus you would have to pay the banks for your accrued interest. So you would add them together to figure out what your loan payoff is, $352.50. That would be your loan payoff.
I'm sorry. I have a question.
Don't be
This-
sorry.
The screen before we closed on November 3rd, and you said that the seller only owed 2 days.
No, 3.
Okay, because I wrote down 2 when it was said, now it just completely threw me off.
No, 3 days.
Good, much better. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, remember the seller is always just like this one. They close on the 12th. They owe 12 days. It is always the day of closing that the seller is responsible for with accrued interest. No deviation. If they close on the 20th, they owe 20 days. If they close on the 3rd, they owe 3 days. If they close on the 4th, they owe 4 days. What you got, Claire?
So this is for interest. So because the July 1st payment would be paying for all of June, right? So
Mhm.
will it ever ask, like, if you just pay your loan payoff of the 352 plus you owe the interest, do you owe, since you close on July 12th, do you owe half of the mortgage or hazard insurance or principal or is that just?
So you're going down a rabbit hole because here's the thing. You're not going to make a payment. You know, obviously when you pay for your balance, you're not going to make another payment after July 1st payment because normally your next one would be the next month. But basically the money that's in your escrow account is kept separate. And so no, you're not going to make any partial payment that month. And what's going to happen is any money that's left in your escrow account, you're going to get a refund check for because all of your accounts are going to be closed once you sell your house as a seller. So if you still had $2,000 sitting in that escrow account, they're going to send you a $2,000 check and empty it out anyway and send it to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oops. So this is another example of the accrued interest. So it's dealing with a seller. So see if you can come up with the accrued interest for me. Make sure you're feeling all right. And then we'll switch to interim for the buyer. Oh. Walk through this one. Seller owes 2 days, closing on January 2nd. And they have an outstanding balance of 178,372. So let me get my calculator up. So you take your loan balance of 178,372 and multiply by your interest rate of 4.25% to get annual interest of $7,580.81 divided by 360 should give you $21.06 a day. And then $21.06 times 2, 42.12, or if you didn't, we've gotten 42.11, no big deal. If you round it differently than me, that answer's fine. You'll never come down to rounding like that. So, and then just for clarity, these would be considered debits at closing. So this would be a seller debit, and then the buyer's interim interest would be a buyer debit because they are cost, right? They're having to pay them. How are we feeling? So this is just that example that I was just dealing with, and I'm not going to make you do this one, but if you were dealing with this, obviously you have to take your loan balance and add your accrued interest to get your seller's loan payoff, like I just showed you. That is how it's calculated. That is why your principal balance is not the same as your loan payoff, because it's loan payoff plus interest you owe the bank to get your loan payoff. So you would just take that loan balance of what we just did, and that 42.12 added to it, and that would be your loan payoff. So interim interest is the more testable one, in my opinion. I just really think that you're more likely to see questions on interim interest versus the accrued interest. And so the interim interest is the amount that the buyer owes in the interim of their schedule kicking in, because I told you your first monthly payment is not going to be due until the following month. In other words, if you close in January, you are not going to be making a February payment. You're going to be making your first payment on March 1st. And so March 1st payment will pay for all of all of February. Well, if you're closing on January 7th, that means that there is a bunch of days that they didn't get interest for. And so they say, I started lending you money on the 7th, pay me money for the days I let you borrow in January that I your amortization schedule. And the reason they do this is because if they were to put it on any of your payments, then your amortization schedule doesn't work. I told you amortization is a very complex thing. The payments are the same. And so if you were to make one payment different, all the rest of them the same, it would totally screw up the way that amortization is supposed to work. And so as opposed to doing that, they just say, well, let's just pay it at closing. So interim interest is called prepaid interest, because you are prepaid. It normally wouldn't have been due until later, because it's paid in arrears. Sounds like somebody's body slamming somebody in the room next to me. I don't know what's happening. Anyway. So remember how this works. 30 days minus the day of closing plus 1 to calculate the buyer's days that they're responsible for. Okay. Interim interest called prepaid interest. And so it always just stays in that month.
Excuse me, Seth. So,
Yeah.
if you close on February 28th and you're a buyer, you have to pay 3 days of interest.
Say that one more time.
If you're a buyer and the closing is on February 28th, do you have to pay 3 days of interest?
No, you would pay 1 day of interest, because in the real world, we actually do real calendar days for prorations and calculations. But in this class, we have to do 30.
Okay.
Yeah, we just treat every month as having 30 in this class for consistency of learning these math concepts. but in the real world, it's based off of real calendar days. Does that make
Okay.
sense? So you would pay 1 day in the real world if you're closing on February 28th. But if you're closing in this fictitious pre-licensing class, you would be responsible for 28th, 29th, and 30th because we say every month has 30 days. That make sense? What you got, Claire?
Oh,
Is
I
that
was
your
just-
dog?
I think she said January. That's so right, Jody, or
Did you say February?
No, I was saying February because I
Oh.
didn't quite understand the 30 days. I thought that was a real estate thing, but that's just for the class.
No, it's a pre-licensing thing only.
Okay.
In the real world, we prorate to real calendar days. And so, you know, just like I said, for consistency in this class, we teach you 30 days for every month. But
Okay.
it's in the real world, we do real calendar prorations. Yeah.
I walked away for just 1 second, so forgive me if this was just said. There was a ring.
I
on my
will
doorbell.
never forgive you for this, Heather.
Forgive me, please, I beg of you. On the test, is it 30 days or real
30.
calendar?
30, always. The test in this class, the state licensing exam, 30-day months, 360-day years.
Class matches test. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, class matches test. That would be cruel and unusual punishment if it didn't. But in post-licensing, we do real calendar prorations because that's when you have your license and that's the big leagues. But for pre-licensing consistency, 30-day month, 360-day year, always, always, always. Yes. So this is where we were talking about those days, right? When we're doing this, it is always 30 minus the day of closing plus 1, because you have to include the day of closing. And so this is just showing you, if you're closing on the 18th, you've got the 18th, 19th, 20th, all the way through and including the 30th, which makes it 13 days in this example that's closing on July 18th. So for interim interest only, are you adding that plus 1? Please, God, do not start trying to add 1 when we get to tax prorations or anything like that. Because normally the buyers for tax prorations just pay starting after the day of closing. But because this is interim interest, they start paying it the day of closing because the bank say, here, I let you borrow money today, start paying me back today. Everybody with me? So let's do some calculations because I feel like you folks are some sharp cookies. Try to tackle this one for me. So this is interim interest for a buyer. So day of closing through the end of the 30-day month. So for this one, calculate the days that they're responsible for. It is closing on April 30th. So 30, I'm sorry, it's closing on April 9th. So 30 minus 9 plus 1. 22 days that the buyer is responsible for. And then you take the purchasing a new home. So that is the purchase price at $382,000 times your 90% loan to value ratio, right? This is one of those multi-step problems. Get your loan amount of 343. I'm going to write this down too, so I don't lose it. 343,800 times your annual interest rate of 6.25% gives us annual interest of 20,487.50 divided by 360, which gives us our daily interest, also called per diem, right? Amount per day, 59.69 times your 22 days, 1,113 and 18 cents, 13 cents, depending on how you rounded or, changed it or whatnot. And this would be buyer debit, because this is interim interest for buyer. Buyer debit. You got to pay it to the bank at closing. How are we feeling?
Tired.
Tired. Yeah, I hear you. Two. Admittedly, this time change, not because of the one tonight, but because of the one here, I had to go to Walmart and get a new hard drive for like the video footage. By the time I got done and I was just hanging out, and it was like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And because of the time change, I had to be up at like 6 a.m. this time because I had to start teaching at 8 a.m. I don't know. It's all got me out of whack. I'm also tired. The point I'm trying to make. But y'all were working so hard learning new stuff. I'm just slinging it at you, and y'all are just being champs, right? Y'all were just rock stars. So we just broke that one down. Now we'll do some more practices with this.
Quick question, Seth.
Yeah.
For the worksheet that we have on the portal, you have to upload it, so it doesn't give you the answers. How do we get the answers for that worksheet?
There should be completed videos, I think, that Travis has done in there for a lot of the worksheets. If not, I can get you a completed one so you know what the answers are. But I'll double check. Like if you tell me which one it is, just like email me. I'll look and see if the video with the answer is in there. If not, I'll do one for you.
Got it. Okay.
Whew. Which leads us to the last section of chapter 6, which means, folks, let me remind you of something. You are well in advance of where you need to be, because we will probably finish 6.4 today. And we weren't even supposed to get through it until halfway tomorrow, which is good. This is a good thing. It means you were very much under things, and it means we're very much going to have time for review of all the topics, which is a fantastic position to be in. So, yeah, you. Although I know it's mean because I just have to give you information after information after information. Don't get to stop, Tell you what, let me see how many slides are left in this section. Let me do what I did last week and give you a little bit of a review gameage too, if I like them, because sometimes there's ones I don't like. Oh yeah. Cool. So here's what we'll do. I will give you a little bit of a break. Let me find some Kahoots to review, and then for the last little bit of class, I'm going to let you perk up a little bit, play this for a little bit, because we're in good place. And I only have 20 slides to go for this. And so for like the last 30 minutes of class, I'll move back to the slides, but for the next 30 minutes, I'll just play some review games, see how you're feeling. So hang tight. I just gotta find something because we're in like a different order. Hmm. That's a short, sweet, simple one. I'll find one different one. Okay, I'll just, your brains get a little bit of a break while I hunt this down. You know what? The way that these are grouped together, I forgot the ones that I've made. There's some that have like all the stuff we've talked about, but they also have other stuff, so that might confuse the hell out of you. Let me try one more place. I've got two that we can do right now, and then what I'll try to do is get logged into the other one because I've got a couple different Kahoot accounts for different ones I've created in organizations. But here we go. I've got two that you should be able to figure out. So one is shorter, one is a little bit longer, and then I'll try to get logged into the other one and we'll go from there. So this is one on what we call the license law and commission rules. And we've talked about a lot of these concepts. We haven't finished this section yet, but we've talked about these because these deals with, you know, provisional brokers versus full brokers and agency and all that jazz. So let's see what you got for this one, just to kind of review some of that agency and license law and commission. Of 21 of you fine folks in here. So almost there. Remember, don't get squirrely and get knocked out. Just another 15 seconds or so to get in. Nobody fall out. Keep your phone from locking. So somebody was added in and taken out at the same time. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. All right, let's do the thing. See what you got. So this is one of the ones that we haven't really gone over in copious amounts yet, but it's coming up. So don't feel bad about this one, but let's talk. Okay. So the North Carolina Real Estate Commission may, after a hearing, take disciplinary action against a licensee who has. So here's the deal. If you are licensed in the state of North Carolina, one of the rules under the North Carolina Licensing Commission rule is you have to report any criminal convictions or disciplinary actions by another licensing board within 60 days. 60 days. And so if you get in the South Carolina Real Estate Commission, you have to report that to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, and they may take your license if they feel like you are a danger in that state as well. So it is both 1 and 2. Any violation of the North Carolina License on Commission rule, and then obviously criminal conviction or disciplinary action by another licensing board, they may act on that as well. And we're going to talk more about that one in detail, but most of these we've touched on. That's one of the ones we really haven't. See what the next one is. Oh, you're just gonna have to take some of these with a grain of salt, because like I said, I wanted to let you play a game, but there's so many different places that we haven't gone yet. So I figured this would be the path of least resistance to let you play a game. This is another one that we haven't really gone over. And so let me talk about this. This is a good learning opportunity. These are very testable in North Carolina, okay? When you're dealing with getting your license, once your license is issued, we basically have a fiscal year of July 1 to June 30th. And you have to renew your license every year, meaning pay $45 renewal fee every year by June 30th to keep your license what we call current. If you fail to pay your renewal fee, your license will expire. Okay. Now I'll go ahead and tell you there's another date that you have to be aware of that's testable from the North Carolina side of the test. June 10th is the date that continuing education has to be completed by after your first renewal year. So it is March. So if you find folks get your license in April, your first license renewal will be on June 30th of this year. So you have to pay $45 by June 30th of this year, because they issue it, and then you'll also have to renew it when that time comes. And so you have to get CE done after your first renewal. CE stands for continuing education. After your first renewal, meaning in your second renewal year before June of your second renewal. So those two dates are very important. June 10th is the date for CE. June 30th is the date for renewing your license.
So using the example you just mentioned, so if we obtained our license in April, we paid the renewal fee on June 30th, but our CE wouldn't be due until June 10th of 2024, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And how many credits of CEs do we have to do?
It is 8 hours. And so it is a 4-hour elective course and a 4-hour update course, totaling 8 hours total. And we'll get into more details on that too. But when you are a provisional broker or a full broker, you take what's called Gen Up, stands for General Update. If you are a BIC or BIC eligible broker, you take BIC Up. And that is the update portion of that, right? Depending on what you are. And then there's over 230 approved electives by the, so you can take any elective approved by the Real Estate Commission for your elective credit. Yes, yes. I don't remember what the next one is. You may just be playing the guessing game again, which yeah, it's fine. This is fun. It's learning. It'll be all right. I just figured this was like the least mean one because there's so many things that we have not talked about that are like looped into the other ones because of the way they're done. So there we go. So this one is talking about blind ads, folks. In North Carolina, all real estate brokers must. Let me just clarify each piece of this, okay? You do not have to have a trust account. If you're going to handle other people's money, you would need a trust account, but there's no legal requirement for a firm or a broker to have one as long as they're not handling money. Remember, realtor is something different than a broker. You're a broker because you get a broker's license. You're an agent because you represent other people, and you're a realtor only if you join a trade organization called the National Association of Realtors. There's not a requirement to be a realtor ever. Complete CE each year in order to keep your license current. Remember that word current deals with currency. You pay your renewal fee to keep your license current. CE keeps your license active, right? Because you can be current and inactive, meaning if you have an education deficiency, you can't play real estate because you're inactive, even though your license is current. So that would not be the right word for that. Okay? Currency expenses make you expired. And so the last one deals with blind ads. Folks, a blind ad is anytime the advertisement does not contain the name of the real estate firm. They have to know when they pick up the phone and call, Susan with, at 123 Main Street, listing that it is a real estate professional. So if you had any advertisement that did not contain the name of the firm, it is a blind ad and it is prohibited. Okay, has to say ABC Realty, XYZ Realty, Coldwell Banker, whatever the name of the firm on there. Otherwise, it's considered a blind ad. Very important for the North Carolina portion of the test. Just guess on this one. So this was actually a trick question. It's kind of mean as the Dickens. Provisional brokers can't deposit any money in any way, shape, or form. There is rules that state if a provisional broker is handling money, they need to deliver it immediately to the person who it's going to, meaning if it's, earnest money, you need to take it to whoever the escrow agent is immediately. And if it is due diligence money, you take it to the seller immediately. You do not have the option of depositing it in any way, shape, or form. So that's kind of a trick question. But we'll talk more about that one. Speaking of which, when is that coming up? Let me just, well, I'll look at that in a second. Don't my ADD to get the best of me. There we go. A provision of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission residential square foot line states, and so we have talked about this, that the living area must be accessible from other living area. Okay, you cannot walk out into unfinished or unheated or anything like that and include it in the space. It has to be accessible from other heated living area. That is a true statement. See what the next one is. Think disclosure. So the working with real estate agents disclosure is proof that a broker disclosed agency options to the consumer and told them how it works. Folks, red is not, because it is not required in all real estate transactions. It is only required in sales transactions. If you're helping a tenant rent, or if you're helping a property owner as a property manager, you do not have to give anybody the disclosure. It is in sales transactions only. It is not given at initial contact. The deadline is first substantial contact. At an open house, you may never have first substantial contact, and so there may be no obligation to give anybody one at all. Remember, it is required to disclose agency to a seller's agent at initial contact if you are a buyer's agent. And then nobody picked that one, which that makes my heart happy, as long as you didn't pick yellow, right? It never, ever, ever creates an agency relationship. It's just a menu of options. Here's how it works. Here's the thing, folks. This one's tricky because designated is a type of dual, and you cannot have any type of dual if it's two different firms. That is what we call cooperating brokerage. Dual agency is impossible if you've got two different firms. There's no realm that you can have dual agency if there's two different firms. All the rest of these are okay. A BIC and a full broker, right? Remember, non means not. So a non-provisional broker is a full broker. A few more left on this one. Let's see what we got. Hang tight, folks. Let me switch to some headphones really quick, and then I'll explain this one. Hold on one second. gonna take these off. Sorry about that. My kids just showed back up and it was gonna get loud. And I'm like, no, outside would be better. We got like 30 minutes left of class. So they just like, we're good. So I apologize. So let's talk about this one really quick. Which activity requires an active real estate license? Remember, real property for others for compensation. Okay, managing a rental property is a piece of real property, and managing it, leasing, right? Doing all that is an brokerage activity. And so your parent is somebody else, and getting a small monthly fee is compensation. It doesn't matter that it's a parent. It doesn't matter what it is. If you do real property for others for compensation, a license is required. Showing rental properties managed by a broker employer, that is an exemption, and we're going to talk more about that one. If you are employed by a broker property manager, you can show properties for lease legally, but not for sale, and you have to be paid salary or hourly. You can't be paid on a transactional basis. So we'll talk more about that exemption down the road. Scheduling a listing appointment for a broker employer, that doesn't require a license because that is sorry. That's just administrative duties. That's what that is. And then selling your own investment property, you can sell your own property without a license. You don't need one. Folks, this one, the only reasonable answer here was the paying the renewal fee. And here's why. You cannot be active if your license is expired. And so you would have to at least have it paid, your renewal to be current and to be active. Because if you didn't, I feel like my kids are about to walk in here again. I don't know what they're doing. Just for a second. We've got a little bit of time left to go over some stuff, but I just want to take a minute before I get into the financing stuff, because we're still in good shape, to kind of talk about the way that everything's going to go. We're about to wrap up unit 6, which is financing, although that's one that you need to listen to over and over again because it'll help you, kind of grasp the concepts with it. Then we're going to get into valuation. And I'll tell you this, valuation isn't nearly as big as the financing, but the verbiage can get very confusing, especially with like the cost approach to real property valuation. And so you just need to be very careful with the way that verbiage is in there. For example, let me tell you how it's confusing. There is the cost approach to real property valuation, which utilizes, the premise of what would it cost to replace this? And there's 2 different costs associated with what it would be like to replace a building. There's reproduction cost, investment cost. Well, that's not confusing enough. Understand that we look at the land separately. And so we would actually do what's called the sales comparison approach for the land in order to do the cost approach. So it's kind of like inception-y and weird verbiage, and it gets confusing too. But I promise that after we get through 7, things are going to be a little more okay, because the financing and the valuations and the agency are the worst topics. Contract law, really not that hard to understand. A lot of information, but really not that hard to understand. Then we get into these sales contracts and offers and acceptance, and all of that fun stuff. So at this point, I guess what I want to ask you folks is there anything that you've been seeing in the Learn, Test, Pass and your studies and the quizzes that's not making sense that you just want to talk about for a second, or circle back around to a different concept for a second, to see if there's anything like that before I make you do the last little bit of financing to finish the day?
So, I have a question. So I was doing the quizzes in Learn Test Pass. So I mean, most of the quizzes I was doing, I was trying to do it for 2 times, 3 times, so that I get used to it. So as long as we do and we get familiarized with the questions from the Learn Test Pass, so what would be the percentage, approximate percentage we would be covering in the final state and um, state test or of federal test?
You mean, how does all the Learn Test Pass and our test correlate with the state licensing exam?
Yes.
It is very often that if you are taking our quizzes and acing them, and final exam, and you make anywhere from like an 85 to 100, that you're probably going to pass the state licensing exam. I mean, the odds are very good. If that's what you're asking.
Yes, that's good. That's good.
Yep.
Thanks.
Mhm.
For me, 3.4, the one with the long quiz, is the hardest for me. Like I keep retaking the quiz and getting different answers. And the seller sub agent in particular, can that only be for the seller, or if that makes sense, can it be on both the buyer and the seller side?
Let me explain, because I think, and I don't know if that question ever got removed. There is one question that is stupid as hell in that section. If it never got removed, it's wrong. It is just, I must vehemently disagree with the question, because the question is wrong. And so there's a question that was, and so it may still be in there, that basically said, which of the following is true if, you showed the home as a seller sub agent and then signed a buyer agency agreement. And the question suggests that you're now a dual agent. Well, that's vehemently false. That is 1,000% false, because you can be a seller sub agent from a different firm. So switching from a seller sub agent to a buyer's agent does not automatically mean dual agency. That question is 1,000% false. So if you saw that one, throw it out. I don't like that question. It doesn't make any sense. And
That
behind
question
it,
has given me, that question has kicked my ass.
That's the
yeah,
question.
throw it out. It's wrong. It's wrong. And here's the thing. I'm telling you, this is where I have a different opinion than some of our other instructors, but I can always back up why I have the opinion I do. And let me show you. I've pointed that question out to a couple of people. Let me show you this. And they here's the thing. Watch. Let me find this.
While you're pulling that up, Seth, on our course exam, do we get the results, like a breakdown of our answers to the questions?
I will let Becky answer that, because I don't know if you do or not.
Do you mean for the final exam? The one at the end of the course?
Yes.
No, you won't get to see, you'll see the section that you missed, but you will not see the specific question.
So you'll see like it was like agency or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Let me see if I can pull up a fun fact before you guys take a test. We take tests and we test the test and we try to break the test so that you are less likely to run into anything. And I have been going through it. Remember, I am not a realtor. I do not have a realtor brain, and my score is, yeah, Napoleon had a better effect at Waterloo than I have on these tests. So I will be right back with the score.
Yes, you'll get a breakdown of the category. Let me show you this though. Remember what I told you about this syllabus? This syllabus is put out by the who writes the North Carolina licensing exam. And when you talk to that lady who writes the North Carolina test, and I say, what can be on the test? She says, if it's on the syllabus, it can be on the test. And so to help you with that question that we were just talking about, Remember, I already showed you this, but I want to remind you. Agency relationships when two companies cooperate in a cross sale or co-broker transaction, meaning ABC, XYZ, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker. Agency can never rise. And what does it say right there? Seller sub-agency. And it talks about switching from a seller sub-agent to a buyer's agent. That question is wrong. Seller sub-agency can happen across firms. It can. So toss that question out. Yeah. I can always back up why I tell you that, folks, educate perfect science. When you sit in a room, let me give you an example. As terrible as this is, I'm gonna be honest with you. We have the Real Estate Educators Association, and I'm on the board of that. And we have a Facebook group. The educators will ask questions all the time. And yes, there's always some new educators that don't know some stuff, but there's also some other educators that will ask questions about things like, CE credits. And folks, the Real Estate Commission License Law and Commission Rulebook, it's long, it's arduous, it's a pain. And so I'm telling you, not even us have sat through it end to end, or if we've done it, it's been in fragmented sections. And so when somebody asks a question, even in a room of instructors, you get differentiating answers because our interpretation is sometimes different. But I can always back up why I'm telling you what I'm telling you. And this is why, because it will be tested like this on the state licensing exam. I promise you. This is from the commission. Has nothing to do with a crystal ball, has nothing to do with a warm, tingly feeling that you get when you stand just right. It has to do with this is how they test you. Anything else in the 3.4 section? Because Claire, was it you talking about that? Like I knew as soon as you said 3.4 that question was in there, so I wanted to provide that clarity because that question's garbage. But are there any others that are throwing you for a loop? And remember too, anytime you're taking those quizzes, folks, if you see anything crazy like that contradicts anything I've said, screenshot it, bring it to class, and we'll talk about it. Because I want to make sure that you have the right information and that it's drilled in your heads the right way. And that one question, toss it out. What else you got? Let me just remind you, if you talk to me and ask me questions, then you don't have to learn about financing legislation today in the last 13 minutes.
I have another question then. No one's going.
Okay.
What was talked about on Sunday of last week? I still need to go back through it, but like you said, the main difference is going to be the foreclosure process between title theory and lien theory. Which one was the judicial?
Lien theory state is a judicial foreclosure because the buyer actually holds legal title in lien theory states. And so all the mortgage does is pledges the home as collateral, says, Mr. and Mrs. Bank, I promise that I understand that if I don't pay you, you're going to come after my house. And so it is a judicial foreclosure. They have to actually go to court and get legal ownership to force the sale of it. In North Carolina, it is a non-judicial, another title theory state, it's non-judicial foreclosure. They already are holding legal title. And so we just have a power of sale foreclosure. They're holding it, they can sell it. Yeah.
And so that doesn't go through a court system, but the lien theory goes through a court system. Got it.
Yeah, for us, we have a hearing in front of a magistrate, which is just like a formal announcement about us about to sell it at auction, but it doesn't actually go through like the actual courts. It's just a hearing, like it's a notice saying this is about to happen. It's not like you can contest it or anything. It's this is what's happening. Yeah, and then the judicial does go through the courts, have to file a suit to get legal title back. Yep. What else? Nothing? You folks just know everything about everything already?
Like Sandeep was saying, sometimes I just go, like if I mess up in the middle of it, I'm like, dang it, I knew that answer. And then I go back and sometimes I'll just, because I know we can take the quiz over and over again, I'll just hit A and start all over until and I'm not just doing it by memorization. I'm reading the stuff at the bottom, the rules, like why it is this way. But I guess my question is when we do the exam review, can we do that multiple times over and over and not be penalized? Like which test can we only take once? How does that
All the
work?
ones in Learn Test Pass, you can take multiple times.
Okay. All right.
All of the quizzes, all of the midterms, all of those can be taken multiple times, as many times as you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The only one you can't take as many times as you want is the final exam. You get
Understandable.
2 cracks at it.
Yeah. Oh,
And I know this is probably like beating a dead horse, but if we prepare ourselves and we do well on the practice exams, the midterm exams, what's the likelihood that we'll do just as well on the final?
If you're studying and you're doing all the material and you're asking me questions and you're following along and you're feeling good on these quizzes, you're going to do excellent on this final exam. But if you're just sitting here and you're like, this is confusing, I'm not going to listen, and you don't touch Learn Test Pass until the last day of class trying to get it in, you're not, number one, you're not going to succeed. It is impossible to do Learn Test Pass within a couple of days at the end of the class. So hopefully you've been working on it this whole time, because it's very easy to get behind. There's so much in there. But if you're following along, you're doing it. I mean, I just had, a lot of students ace this class from the last group, and a lot of them have already gotten their license, right? What Becky and I have heard from a couple of the students who have already passed the test, state licensing test, and had their licenses issued. And their class ended, the weekend before yours started. So if you do it, it's very much attainable, but don't get it confused. It's hard. That's why we have all these resources. You got to practice. The test taking practice is as equally important as the knowledge, because it's 60% knowledge, 40% test taking ability. Because it's tricky. And speaking of which, I'll talk about this now for the last few minutes, but that is one of the other conversations we'll bring up is what we call test taking strategies. For example, what we call it, you don't need to know this name, but it's called a Boolean style question. And a Boolean style question means, every single answer has one of 2 possible values. And so you just saw those on the on the review, the little games. Because if we say all of the following are true except, we have to understand that that means that every answer is either true or false. And so if it's all of the following are true except, you're looking for the 3 things that are true and the 1 thing that's false. And the 1 thing that's false is the answer. Okay, it's one of these things is not like the other mentality. And so sometimes realizing that that's how the question is formulated, it can help you get the question right. Because if you know 1 thing has absolutely nothing to do with the other 3 things, even if you don't know what the other 3 things are, that's the answer. So the test taking strategy, the other strategy that I would tell you, you've got to read the question in its entirety, figure out what it's asking you, look at every single answer, and then reread the question again. And I can't stress this enough, because let's play a game here. What is 2 plus 2?
4.
4.
4.
And because you know that, if you were taking a test that said what's 2 plus 2, you're going to look for the number 4 and you're going to circle it. You can't have that mentality state. I don't care what you think you know, because there are always some answers that sound right, multiple answers that sound right. And you're always looking for the most correct answer. So don't you ever think in your mind that you know what it is before you look at the answer choices. Read the question, read every answer choice, reread the question, and then pick one. Because if you just go with what you think it is, you're probably going to get it wrong, because it is always the most right answer. And make sure it changes depending on what the question is. Because remember, provisional versus non-provisional, the question changes greatly. It's about 10 million words that sound the same, and we'll get into that later, and it changes the question greatly.
Okay, I'm just looking through the quiz of 3.4
Yeah.
right now. It says an agent is working with Bob Buyer and knows that Bob is willing to pay the asking price of the property listed with her firm. She must keep this confidential if she is a dual agent, seller sub-agent, non-provisional agent representing the seller, she used to represent Bob under a buyer's agency agreement. So she's working with Bob. So I'm guessing,
Do you have it pulled up on your computer?
yes.
You want to just share your screen so we can see it? It's gonna be easier than explain it to everybody.
I have my. Okay. Can you see this one?
It's, there we go. Yep, go.
This one? Okay.
An agent is working with Bob Buyer, knows that Bob is willing to pay the asking price of a property listed with her firm. She must keep this confidential if, and so it's asking when she would have to keep this confidential. And so here's the thing, you can't put information in the question that's not there. And so it's asking about the different scenarios. So she would keep that confidential information confidential if she is the agent.
If she's what? Sorry, you cut out. If
A
she's
dual agent. Because remember, dual agent, she's working with Bob Buyer, knows that Bob is willing to pay asking price listed with her firm. So if it's her firm and we were doing dual agency, you would have loyalties to the seller and the buyer simultaneously. And so you couldn't hurt anybody. So dual agent would mean that she was also representing Bob or it means the firm is representing both. And so you would have to keep that confidential only if you were a dual agent. If she was a seller, her loyalties are to the seller, and you have to tell customer confidential information to your client. If she's a non-provisional agent representing the seller, she's still a seller's agent, would have to tell them. And she used to represent Bob under a buyer agency agreement, doesn't change anything. Because if the used to means he's now a customer again. And remember, I told you, once you switch back to a customer, we don't owe you anything but honesty and fairness, and we will use your secrets against you. Because you're a customer now, not a client.
that makes sense. Okay. Okay.
And that's what I mean. If you bring those questions to me, we can talk through them and make sure you're very comfortable. I mean, we're like I said, we're in good shape, so I can do this, a couple times, the next couple classes as well. Just make sure you screenshot them, save them, and we can talk about them. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
You're gonna upload the videos this weekend?
Yes. I've got them all edited. I just can't upload them because the slow internet speeds were taking like 8 hours and they kept crashing before they could actually upload. So I'll be back in North Carolina, hopefully Monday morning. And so they will all be uploaded Monday morning. Yes. Folks, if you ain't got nothing else, y'all get on out of here. Take your 3 extra minutes. Y'all can have it. Y'all earned it. Y'all have worked your tushies off. I will see y'all tomorrow morning. Same bat time, same bat channel. You have a lovely, lovely afternoon. Enjoy it.
Recording stopped.